but I'll give a quick introduction here. So I'm going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is taking mundane tasks and using something that automates it all for you, which in this case is going to be Backand, which is basically database as a service. So let me go ahead and share out the presentation here. All right. So a little bit about myself. So been doing web development for 15 years or so-ish, and really focused on a lot of backend development and a lot of database stuff, a lot of creating the APIs and doing all the CRUD tasks. And much as I enjoy doing that stuff, it does get kind of mundane to do, which is why I'm presenting here. And then I also speak at a lot of events. So I spoke at like 30 events last year throughout the US and in Europe. Locally, I organized the Ionic Arizona and Phoenix version control meetups. And then I blog at digitaldrummerj.me. Kind of enough about myself, though. Let's get right into this. So our agenda, really, we're going to talk about 4 questions as we go through this. So first question we're going to tackle is why backend as a service? I talked about it a little bit in the introduction, but really having it as a service, it allows you to focus on what truly does matter, and that's crafting your front ends. You could have the greatest API in the world, but your users don't care about that. Your users care about the UI that they get to use. So by having it as a service, we get to focus on that. We get a full server for our application out of this, and we don't have to do any installations. There's no server maintenance, no patching, no security updates. We don't have to worry about any of that stuff that takes us away from doing what we really need to do, and that's getting functionality to our end users. So our second question, so why backend? Why this platform out of the umpteen number of platforms that are out there? So I picked a few things out that are my favorite items. And this is not a complete list. This is just my favorites. So you get the full cloud server that you don't have to maintain. You get a database out of this. They take care of creating all the schema for you, doing all the backups. You still get the ability to have server-side logic so that you can still write your own custom queries. You can still do security checks on the server, because as every web developer knows, you're going to do your security checks in the UI, but you also need to do them on the server, because it's very easy to intercept those and change those. So they give you that ability to do all that server-side logic. They give you all the user management stuff that a typical application is going to have, so that you don't have to worry about implementing all of that. To create our data models, there's a couple ways to do it. The first way is to mark it all up in JSON. You can do all your relationships, all your fields, whether it's required, not required, and Backend's automatically going to create you this database, and they're going to automatically generate you a full REST API out of this. Now, I realize not everyone likes to do all of their data modeling in JSON. It can be just as mundane to create your data model that way. Luckily, they have a visual data model creator. So here we can add in new tables, new columns, change any of the field values. It'll automatically update the JSON model for us and automatically update our REST API. And it's a fully web-based editor. It works pretty well. Well, it's one of my favorite ways to create it in Backend, because I don't like to mark everything up in JSON. And then you get a REST API that looks like this. So all of your typical gets, so you can get a full list out of it. You can post new data back. You can get a single item. You can update items. You can delete items. And then you can call it using any kind of web service that can call HTTP. In this case, it's a little bit of sample Angular code. But I tell it, I want to do a get, give it my URL, and it's got a few parameters that you can pass in if you choose. It's got paging out of the box. I can also filter my data. So say I wanted the full list of projects, but I only wanted projects that I owned, I can do that filtering here. I can also do the database sorting. Because as any database person knows, you really should sort your data at the database level, let it do its job versus always sorting on the UI. Then I mentioned server-side logic. So they have a couple things you can do with this. You can do on-demand, where you call a URL and it's going to run that code, or you can do it on triggers. And they have triggers for create, update, and delete. And you can do it before your data goes into the database. You can do it during, which means they basically temporarily store the data, but haven't fully committed it yet. And you can run through all your code, and then it will commit it. And then after is where it's already been committed to the database, and you're doing your updates. And you got 3 kinds of code you can run. You can do full JavaScript. You can send an email. And when you pick the send email option, it's going to give you a nice form where you fill in all the values that you want there. So you don't have to code up how to send the email. You just fill in a form. Or you can execute SQL statements. So pretty powerful stuff here. And in our demo, we'll look at a little bit of that. They also have this really cool option called custom queries. So if we wanted to write a query that, in this case, returns all of our projects back, like I can get it here, SQL statements, no SQL statements. I get a unique URL for every one of the custom queries. And then I call it just like all the rest of my REST APIs. And in the editor here, I can actually click on test query, and it'll show me a nice grid of all the results so I can make sure it looks right. I can also click on the show JSON results button and see what my JSON is going to look like and play around with that. It's a pretty powerful way to extend what they provide out of the box. And I mentioned user management earlier. So we get the typical username, password, but we also get social logins. So today they have 4: Facebook, GitHub, Twitter, and Google. They have said that at some point they'll have LinkedIn. And Twitter is actually just a recent option. It's only about a week and a half ago that they added the Twitter option in, so they're still growing the platform. And we'll see how easy it is to implement this in our demo. Out of the box, they've already got it all set up so that they use their API keys so that it'll work. And then once you're ready to go to production, you can set up all of your own keys, so it'll show your application name when the social authentication prompts you. You can also integrate with a whole ton of stuff. So we got MailChimp and PayPal and Stripe and Twilio and pretty much anything that you can make an HTTP call to, they can interact with. For databases, out of the box, they're going to create you a MySQL database. But if you already have your own database somewhere, but you still want to use all the power of Backend and have it generate you the REST API, you can have it connect to your database. It will go ahead and interrogate the schema and create you all the REST APIs. So they support MySQL, Postgres, Heroku Postgres, Amazon, Azure, SQL Server, Oracle. So kind of the sky's the limit a little bit here. They cover pretty much all the bases. So third question, what works best with Backend? So this all sounds great. I've said any HTTP calls or any app that can make HTTP calls can integrate with it, but there are some best practices. They originally built it for Ionic and they've extended it to other tech stacks. So right now they have example apps for Angular, Angular 2, React, Ionic, and Ionic 2. So the URL on this slide, they have full code you can download, you can run it, they'll walk you through how they created it. So great way to get started. If you were a parse user, and obviously you know you have to migrate off sometime before next January, so they have a full parse migration utility built in. It's available on the top of every page pretty much. Click the migrate from parse. It pops up this little UI where you give it all the schema. It'll get your data and import it in and create you all the REST API stuff. So our fourth and final question here. Now we're on to how do we use it, which really is the demo. So we're going to look at a little sample app that I'd written that's a project task manager. So we can get a list of projects and associate tasks to each one of those and check off if they're done, not done. So we'll take a quick gander of what this looks like here. So it's an Ionic application. It's got a nice grid here. You can see my project name, see when it was created. I can slide it on over, get a delete button here. If I click on it, it will show me any tasks that are there. I can complete or not complete it. And this is all powered by Backend. And it's got full social login. So if I log out here, you can see I got username, password, or I got all the social ones. You'll notice Twitter's missing. The time I wrote this app, they didn't have Twitter as an option, and I haven't updated the app yet. But I will show you how easy it will be to update an app here in a couple minutes. So let's head on over to backend.com. I've already logged into my account. If I want to create a new app, it's as easy as putting an app name in here, give it a title, click the create button. In this case, I'm going to look at the app that powers that to-do list to start out with. So first thing they give you is kind of a nice little dashboard, tells you how many rows you have in each one of your objects, how many actions you have, your security templates. It's kind of a project at a glance. And if I click in the menu on objects and pick model, it defaults to the graphical model. You can also see the JSON side of it. And say I want to make a change here. It will highlight what change I'm going to make and what the row is here. If I wanted to keep it, I click validate update. It'll go off and update everything for me. I can also click on an individual item here if it wants to update. Let's see if I can get into the project. Let's try this again. For whatever reason, my app hung there. Now back under objects, let's pick project. So this is more what I expected it to do. So it shows me all my data. On the right side, it actually shows me sample code of the REST API call that it just ran. So in this case, it was a GET call. I literally could copy and paste this code right into my Angular app, and it would run. I can also see what the JSON response looks like here. I can click add new row, and I can do just like it sounds. It's going to add a new row in here. I can add as many rows as I want in there. I can edit items. I can delete items. Everything you would kind of expect to be able to do with data. If I look at the Actions tab, this is where you can do all of your server-side logic. So I've written a couple items in here. So this one in particular, make sure that when you try to update a project, that you're actually the owner of it or you're listed with the admin role. If you're not the owner, I don't want you to be able to update it. And it even does checks to make sure that the owner that you passed in from the website is the owner that actually is currently logged in. So this way you can't update other people's projects and it will just throw an error out. You can see not much code that had to be written here, and they give you the ability with dbrow to look at any of the columns that came in, and same thing for the user input side of it, so that you can make sure that whatever they passed in and whatever's currently in the row actually match up to what you expect. They even give you the ability with pretty much everything in Backend that has actions you can take. I can actually tell it, go ahead and test it here. And I could change all the values here. I could edit my action, retest it, see what it's going to actually return to me. So pretty cool options that are there, really easy to implement. The security side has some nice stuff as well, where you can lock down certain items here. So in this case, I'm going to filter my projects just based off the users table, well, in the email addresses. This way you can only see your items, but I'm going to show all items to administrators. And I can also overwrite my security template, which in this case, for whatever reason, chose not to pull in my security template. So obviously, I'm having a little bit of internet issues for that one. You can also inspect all of the different fields. You can turn on certain items, like, do you want it to be searchable? Do you want it to be required? Do you want to exclude it from updates and creates? Notice though, you can't update certain fields in here. Even if I click on other ones, you have to actually go back to the model to update most of those items. And all these objects work exactly the same way. So if I click on task, I'll get all the same views here, all the same functionality. The next item is custom queries. So we'll call it all projects. I pull in everything from the project table. And I could update my security. I can override what the template has. In this case, I'm just going to go to the defaults and test query. And so now I have an API that you can actually hit that'll pull back all of my data. It was that easy to write my custom query and to get a RESTful API out of it. Security side, they can't make it much easier than this. By default, they give you all the tokens that you need. They turn on social, or allow you to turn on social authentication, and it uses their key. But if I go through the instructions that are on each one of these pages for GitHub, Google, Facebook, Twitter, I can fill out everything and get my own application set up in those social logins. I'm going to come in here and I'll put in what my client ID and client secret is. This way it doesn't get leaked anywhere in any client-side code. It's strictly in backend. The registered user side is where people have actually signed up for your application. And then the team is other developers on your team that you want to give access to be able to change stuff in backend, like modeling changes, security, any of that kind of stuff. And security-wise, you can set up your own custom templates for what you want roles to do. You can add in other roles here. By default, public doesn't, I think public by default gets read. In this case, I didn't want public to be able to read everything, so I have it all turned off. So you actually have to be a user of the application in order to see it. But it's as easy as coming in and unchecking or checking a box, and you save your template and you're good to go. One piece I did not talk about in the slide deck at all is hosting. So to me, the hosting piece is cool, but it's not the reason I chose backend. So they now give you the ability to upload your application to their hosting servers, and they'll take care of serving it up. I don't know if I would necessarily use that for a high volume production app, but it's a great option to have. And just like all the rest of the pages in backend, their help is fantastic in here. Gives you everything you need to get their client or their CLI installed so you can run then the next command, which is how you get files up there. And it's already filled in my app. It's filled in all of my tokens, my user tokens, and even gave me the folder. So all I need to do is just update the very last item, and it's going to take and sync everything that's on my local machine and send it up there. And then you can click on the hosting files and see all those files. So really cool that they have that option. Not the winning reason to choose backend. One other thing that I haven't talked about is signing up for backend. So last time I looked, they were still offering free lifetime accounts, but that will be going away here shortly. So they are encouraging people that if you're interested in backend at all, even to play with it, go ahead and sign up for the account. It doesn't cost anything. You don't need to give a credit card or anything, but it'll ensure you at least get that free account. So let's look at some code. So I see a question here where someone asked that they see all the examples using Angular's $HTTP and wondered if there's libraries to wrap that for convenience. So there's no libraries per se to wrap that. But what I did here is I actually created an Angular service that, because it's RESTful, they have a very standard, if I run here, way to get to the API. So all the APIs are going to be prefixed with whatever comes out of the get API URL /1/objects/ and then it's going to be my object name. So project, task, user. So it's really easy to create a wrapper like this. Here's my get calls. So I can tell it I want to get this object name. So I can pass in project. If I want a specific one, I could pass in project/1. And it would go get the project that has the ID of 1. I can pass in all my sorting, filtering, page sizes, page numbers. I can even default to it. So in this case, I have it defaulting to 10 instead of the default 20. And same thing for, I want to start on page number 1 if I'm not paging. I can do the same thing here with save items. Set it up as a post, pass in all the data, which is my JSON object for the row representation, and then any parameters, which are options back to the API. If I don't pass anything in, I'm going to tell it return back my object, and that'll populate the auto incrementing ID values for me. Update looks pretty much the same way. You pass in the data. Same thing for delete here. Delete, I pass in the object name and I pass in the ID, and off it goes calling that. So it didn't take much to write that wrapper. And implementation-wise, here's what it looks like to call it. I inject my backend data service into my Angular service. Then I can just call all those methods, pass in the object name, which I set up here. So each of my services has what the table name is. And like any good Angular developer, I have one service per object. So I don't mix and match that stuff. And then I can pass in all my sorting and filtering. So in this case, here's how you actually sort. So I'm going to tell it, I want to sort on name and I want it to be ascending. I don't have any filters. So just make it null and I get all my data back. The filtering side looks exactly like the sorting side. So here I tell it, I want to only get tasks for project IDs that have, or for only this project ID. So pretty easy to use backend for all the different objects. It's really easy for the login side as well. So they really standardized the backend SDK for user management. So notice here to do a sign-in, I don't even have to worry about how do I find the URL for users and what do I call and what's it return. They take care of all that for me. I just pass the email and the password, and they're going to go ahead and call the API, return me back the token if the email and password are valid, and they're going to store it in, I believe they store it in local storage for the token. For social sign-in, unlike many libraries where they have different interfaces for Twitter and Facebook and all those, they standardize. Literally, I just have to say social sign-in and pass it the name of the provider, Facebook, Twitter, Google, and they take care of calling the right OAuth APIs and popping up the right UI so that I can click the approve buttons. Same thing for the sign up. Same thing here for sign out. It gets rid of all the tokens, and then it's just up to my application to handle what happens when I don't find a token. Don't have to worry about calling backend at all. And the sign up piece is really cool that the way they implemented it. By default, if I use it out of the box, it has first name, last name, email, and my password. But say I wanted to add in company or birthday or any other information about a user, I can add that into my users table. And when I sign up, the very last parameter is just a JSON object that has all of those fields filled in. And they take care of, or within the API, of actually populating those fields. So I don't have to write anything custom at all for that. If I want to get user details, minus the password, there's no way to see what the actual current password is in any of the APIs, including all of the admin UIs. I can reset somebody's password, but I can't see what the current password is for somebody. And so this will return back that first name, last name, email, and all the custom fields. So super, super powerful way to do it, and really easy to use. Didn't take much time to implement this at all. And if I wanted to implement the Twitter piece of it, literally I just have to add a button onto my UI and say Twitter is the value to pass in for the provider, and now Twitter's enabled in there. So last bit to kind of share here is all the code that I just showed, and I'll post this in the meetup comments, is on this GitHub repo. So this was from a full workshop that I did at O'Reilly's Fluent Comp. If you wanted to go through it, you could read through the whole README file here, install all the stuff to do it, and go through the slides and create the app. Or to-do-completed is the fully completed application that should, and you literally just need to run npm install and bower install. Because it's an Ionic app, you do need to have the Ionic npm installed. You say Ionic serve, and you can get to all the code, or you can just go through the www folder and inspect all the JavaScript and views and see how the application is actually built up. So that is what I wanted to show about Backend. So you can get to these slides at slides.com/digitaldrummerj. You can hit me up on Twitter. You can hit me up on my blog. And I will post the slide URL as soon as I'm done with this to the meetup comments as well. And I'm not sure if I'll be able to hear your audio, but if you have any questions, you can try to hear it that way, or you can paste them into the Q&A box, and we'll take care of answering them. And if there's no questions, Kevin, just let me know. So there are not any Ionic specific features that Backend has implemented. I think they just started it with, they wanted an easy to use database as a service that they could use for mobile. And they've since been growing that from just being Ionic based to being any tech stack. So is it possible to self-host this, or is it only as a service? So it is only as a service for the API side. You could self-host your own database. And if you do that option, Backend will inspect your schema anytime that you make changes, and keep those two in sync. So give a quick demo here. If I go back and pick the talk demo, which is basically, I just created the app. I hadn't modified any of the default stuff. You'll notice right at the very top, it tells me here, I'm using the current default data model. I can either set up my own data model or click connect your database. By default, it shows me what the MySQL database they created for me is, or click the connect to database button, and I get the different options. And really, I just need to know what's the endpoint, username, password, and database name, and they will go out and inspect the schema and create the API for me. At this point, they don't have any graph databases. So one thing you could do is in the lower right-hand corner of pretty much everywhere in the admin UI, they have this little icon. Click on it, and it's a conversation box. So literally, I could click new conversation, type in any plans to extend to graph databases, and somebody on the team will get back to you. They've been extremely responsive to all the questions that I've asked them over the last few months. So Kevin, thank you for letting me present. It has been fun, and I will publish out the recording to YouTube here in a bit and also post that in the meetup notes. And if people do come up with other questions after we're done here, feel free to hit me up, and if I can't answer them, I will forward them onto the backend team and somebody will get you an answer.